So Lord Caitanya, and we are going to begin with Sankirtan. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Nami Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Bhakti Saraswati Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Vastutyam Vishtarini Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Shraddha Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Hari Bol Hari Bol Gora Hari Bol Jai Gora Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Jai Gora Hari Bol Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Shinkai Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Shri Yurni Karsi Ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shinkai Gaura Premi Hari Hari Bol. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening on this blessed Ekadasi. We're going to discuss chapter 20, the third part of our discussion from this chapter, which is entitled The Goal of Vedanta Study. So let's begin with our prayers. Om Jnanatinarandasya Gunanjanashalakaya Chakshurunmutame Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Vishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Sakadamahyam Dudati Swapadantikam Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Vicharini Nirvisheshwarnivani Sachakya Vicharini. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and thank you for the opportunity to serve as we try to present an overview of the teachings of Lord Caitanya, the wonderful book that was written by Srila Prabhupada and is based on the authorized biography of Lord Caitanya called the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This biography is written by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So we are praying that we can deepen our understanding of the Lord's instructions to us, so that we can and then pass on better so that we can increase our love and our services to Him. So this chapter 20 is the explanation of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings on the Vedanta through the Mayavadi sannyasis of Benares at the time of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's manifest pastime. So Benares state called Varanasi, and it is an ancient city of learning, particularly of impersonalist learning. And these impersonalists were very moved by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teaching, but they wanted to hear from him about why he didn't study Vedanta. So it is not that we are against the study of Vedanta, but it is that Vedanta is not meant to be studied from the impersonalist perspective. So they were very eager to hear from the Lord about this, and he mercifully obliged them. So let us chant the invocation prayer. This is verse 18 of the first chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhaktivinoda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhaktivinoda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhaktivinoda. And the translation is: Glory to Sri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Sri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So we'll begin by reading. In this way, if we study the living entities in the cosmic manifestation, it will appear that they are not different from the original absolute truth. But from the Vedic literature, we understand that the absolute truth has varieties of energy, and that the living entities in the cosmic manifestation are but a demonstration of these energies. The energies are not separate from the energetic. Therefore, the living entity and the cosmic manifestation are inseparable truths, part of the absolute truth. Such a conclusion regarding the absolute truth and the relative truth should be acceptable to any sane man. So we are beginning with this nice paragraph that sums up pretty much what we had discussed last week, the relationship of the energies with the energetic. So the energies of the Lord, whether they are spiritual, that is us, or whether they are material, this material nature, they're all emanating from the Lord and not fully dependent on Him. And we're reading here that because we need His energy to keep existing, actually, we're actually inseparable from the Lord. Now, Mayavadi, someone from an impersonalist background, could take this to mean that our inseparability from the Lord means that we are one with Him. And this would further justify their belief, their mistaken belief, that we actually are God. So how do we understand this teaching of our inseparability from the Lord? So the Lord Himself explained. This is Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, text 6. Yata akasha sito nityam vayuhu sarvatra ko mahan tata sarvani bhutani mattani ti upadharaya. And translation is: understand that as the mighty winds blowing everywhere rest always in the sky, all created beings rest in me. It's a wonderful analogy the Lord is employing here, that of the wind and the sky. So this will clear up our understanding of our inseparability of the Lord while being different from Him at the same time. So we read in Srimad Bhagavatam in the second and third canto that the wind is actually generated from the sky. The sky is also known as ether or space, which is present everywhere, of course. And so existing on the sky, the wind is present everywhere. So the wind depends on the sky for existence, and therefore it is inseparable from the sky. But at the same time, they are two distinct entities. The sky and the wind are not the same. They have their own characteristics, and they are they don't mix. They're not one with each other. So in the same way, we are so dependent on the Lord's energy to exist that we are inseparable from Him. We are, though individual always, right? The same way as the wind and the sky are separate entities always. Our distinction is that we are very small and He is very great. And so we can understand that even though we are inseparable, we can never be equal to Him. As Sri Prabhupada says, any sane person can understand this. We see in another way how the Lord explains that we're all dependent on Him. And for that, we will appreciate this image of the Lord's universal form. So this is the universal form of the Lord. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, Arjuna sees everything in the universe actually physically existing on an apparently material form of the Lord. We'll come back to explaining this concept of the material form of the Lord. So this form is called the universal form. And in this form, it's demonstrated how everything, absolutely everything, is existing on the Lord, right? Drawing its power from Him, being a power of Him, and therefore being inseparable from Him. So He is supplying the power to this entire material energy. We are, of course, in material bodies. We require the material energy to exist in this world. But we can understand that He Himself is that material energy in a sense that it comes from Him. And therefore, He is able to take a form to show Himself as all the material energies in this way. It's like my power to lift is me, right? Because it's a part of me. At the same time, it's only one feature of me. It's not all of me. That is why I say my power, not I power. I possess that power. So the Lord possesses the material energy as a part of it. He can show a universal form that's made of that energy for us to conceive of how everything is resting in Him, just like I can show you my power to lift by lifting up something. But at the same time, He is not that energy, just like I'm not my hand. I am actually the superior being within the body, and the Lord also has a superior reality, a superior energy than this material energy, which has been visualized in this universal form. The Srimad Bhagavatam also describes this form, describes how Garbhadakshay Vishnu appeared as the universal form to show the demigods how everything was resting in the Lord and actually on the Lord, including themselves, everything in this material world. But we must understand the form is more of a kind of representation to help us understand the relationship between the material energy and the Lord better, rather than it actually existing in this way. By us imagining or hearing of this form, we then know how everything in the material world is actually drawing its energy, power, or force from the Lord, and is thus perpetually connected to Him. So we therefore understand that it's not that the Lord has this material universal form. Okay, then if we think like that, we're making the mistake of thinking that the Lord has a material body like us, and that He is the soul within. Right? And that's Mayavad theory. That's not true. The actual reality of this universal form, we could say, is that it's a 3D reconstruct of a very abstract truth to us. It's only because we don't have the understanding of everything perfectly at this stage. But this truth may seem abstract to us, that everything is resting or relying on the Lord's power. like in the verse that we read at the beginning. This universal form, this 3D reconstruct, is there for us to understand something abstract in a clearer way to us. So Sri Prabhupada explains in Canto 1, Chapter 3 of Srimad Bhagavatam, how this form helps us to understand such truth. And it also helps those who are attracted to the idea of God as the universe, right? They are those that want to see Him in the way of having, say, trees for hair, rivers for veins, and so on. That's their level of spiritual understanding. So we know that it's not the most advanced level of understanding because it's the superficial realization of Him. But because it is where they're at, the Lord provides for that to help them get closer to Him, as He says in the fourth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Yayata Mam Prabhadyante Samsadeva Bhajamiyaham. So the problem is that many people foolishly read the universal form in the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and they take it to be further evidence that we are all one with the Lord. Right? They have absolutely no concept that this form is actually showing the exact opposite. It's showing that we're dependent on Him as the subordinate. We are resting on Him who is the total reservoir of energy, that He is the only one capable of supplying us, our being, and everything that we need. Right? And from that, we can realize that dependence can never be equal to the one who is independent, who is avikya. Such foolish people say that the demigod, being part of the universal form, as we can see in this image, it means that they are equal to the Lord, as seen by Arjuna, as all of us, in some way contained in this form. And for them, it means that we're all one. But once again, I can say that my hand is a part of me, right? It's a part of my form, but it's not me, right? In the same way, the Lord is showing the demigod to be part of His universal form, material form, is a representation of His energies, but they are not Him. As we understand right now, the universal form itself doesn't exist. So the demigods as actual physical part of Him doesn't exist either. So in no way are any of us who are subordinate beings the same as the Lord. He just possesses us like I possess my hand. And as my hand depends on me for energy, which it gets by being connected to me so that it can fulfill its service to me and be nourished in the same process for that service to be done, we are also connected to the Lord in the same way, being nourished with our energy so that we can use it in service. This is the purpose of our connection. So we'll carry on reading. Sharing for now. The Supreme Absolute Truth has His inconceivable potency, out of which this cosmic manifestation has been produced. In other words, the Supreme Absolute Truth supplies the ingredients, and the living entity and cosmic manifestation are the byproducts. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, it is clearly stated, Yato va imani bhutani jayante. The Absolute Truth is the original reservoir of all ingredients, and this material world and its living entities are produced from those ingredients. So now we've understood very clearly, both from this verse and many other sources, including the Lord telling us in Bhagavad Gita that He is the source of the material and spiritual worlds, and also in the 7th chapter that all the energy, spiritual and material, are actually His. We understand then that everything is coming from Him. But there's also another dimension to all the ingredients, all the energies of creation coming forth from the Lord. He also activates them so that they can be used or that they can produce whatever we need for existence. So this is explained in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where the energies of the material nature have been created, but the demigods who are meant to utilize this energy in order to carry out functions on behalf of the Lord in the universe actually can't do so. The elements need to be activated by the Lord, so He enters into them to do that. So we can understand this because any material energy requires the living self, the soul, to animate it, like the material body, of course. But there are other elements in this world. For example, the rivers are flowing, the wind is blowing, rocks are falling from the mountaintop. All of these elements are active or activated by the presence of the super soul in everything. So we read how the Lord enters into the elements with a time factor, of course, one of his energies also, because everything in the material world is time, for how long it will last. And we read of this from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, text 2 to 4. The Supreme Powerful Lord then simultaneously entered into the 23 elements with the goddess Kali, his external energy, who alone amalgamates all the different elements. Thus, when the personality of Godhead entered into the elements by his energy, all the living entities were enlivened with different activities, just as one is engaged in his work after awakening from sleep. When the 23 principal elements were set in action by the will of the Supreme, the gigantic universal form, or the Vishvarupa body of the Lord, came into existence. Okay? So we see that the Lord is supplying the ingredients for everything that exists. He is activating the ingredients. He is the power for all of us. He is actually a power that makes all of us up. So in that way, we understand that the Lord actually is everything. And this is the sum and substance of the Chatushloki, the 4 verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It explains how the Lord is related to his energy. So these 4 verses will be explained a bit further by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Prakashananda Saraswati in the coming chapters, and we will discuss it a little further then. But this is a summary of that understanding. Less intelligent persons who cannot understand this doctrine of byproduct cannot grasp how the cosmic manifestation and the living entity are simultaneously one with and different from the absolute truth. Not understanding this, one concludes that the doctrine of byproduct implies that the absolute truth itself is transformed. Now we understand that everything in creation is coming from the Lord and resting from him, simultaneously one and different from him. But the Mayavadis can't actually understand this. For them, so many energies coming from the Lord, a point we discussed last week, with so many energies coming from the Lord, the living entities and the material creation, it means that the total energy of the Lord might be decreased in some way, which implies change. And we described that it's not possible for the absolute truth to be changed. And so they conclude that nothing can come from the absolute truth. So we can understand it that relative truth, they change according to conditions. So, for example, the law of gravity is a relative truth because it exists in this world. But as soon as the atmosphere is removed, then gravity doesn't exist anymore. So in the same way, if the absolute truth is subject to change in some way, then he is not the absolute truth anymore. So the Mayavadis, they have to come up with theories in order to correct this understanding of theirs. And they think that the doctrine of byproduct is false. The way they counter it is by believing that we are never actually produced at any point in time. We're just ever existing the same as God, the same as the absolute truth. And we have just forgotten that we are God under the spell of illusion. Now, they can't explain the material nature in the same way because the material nature doesn't have the same qualities of the Lord like we do. So the way they do away with material nature, to say that material nature is just not real, is completely false. And so for them, the understanding is that we're all God, which is forgotten. Material nature is false. And there was never any byproduct. There was never any creation of us or creation of the material world at all. Right? For them, this is how it renders the absolute truth unchanged. Now we understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead can indeed produce an unlimited number of living entities and an unlimited material creation, and at the same time remain unchanged, because all his energies are actually unlimited. He is never decreased in any way. no matter how many byproducts are emanating from him. Okay, it's actually us that changes when we come from him, and we had described this in relation to two analogies. Okay, so we'll take a look at those analogies now in a little more detail, because I think we ended last week just as we were entering that discussion. Okay, so the doctrine of transformation, right? The way we understand this is that not that the Lord changes, not that the absolute changes, absolute truth changes when any number of energies come from Him, but it is us who change when we come from Him, so that we become something different from Him. So we use the example of milk, you can see on the top left corner. So milk becomes yogurt, the top right corner, and wood, the bottom image, becomes a chair, right? So in the process, it's the energy from milk that changes into yogurt, and the energy from the chair, from the wood, that changes into a chair, right? The milk doesn't change. The milk's nature is still the same. The color is still the same. The taste is still the same. The chemical composition is still the same. It has the same nature, right? The chair and the wood now. The wood also has its qualities still, but it is the chair that has become something different. Okay, the byproduct, that is the chair, has changed. So with the doctrine of transformation, it happens to us, the living entities, and it happens to Maya, that we become something different from the Lord. But it's not actually meant for the Lord. He is always unchanged. He doesn't transform in any way, right? He's like the wood that keeps its characteristics, or the milk that keeps its characteristics, whatever the different products that come from it. Okay, so this doctrine is explained by the Kumara Sampradaya. We had read a few weeks ago, and they explain how we are transformation of the Lord's energy into something that is different from Him, with the implication that we can't go back to being Him again, right? And this is, of course, because they take that the yogurt has now attained a different existence from the milk, and the same for the chair, a different existence for the wood. Now, from our readings, we're going to understand these analogies in a different perspective. This time, we're going to maintain the law of conservation of energy. Last week, we had said that in the material world, for that law to exist, it means that all the milk that was used to make the yogurt has decreased the total quantity of milk, right? That we understand. And in the same way, the total quantity of wood has decreased because some of the wood has been used to make a chair. This is what the Mayavadis think of God producing energy, right? Some of the energies have been used up, and so there's less of the original energy. So this is certainly true in the material world, because the material world is characterized by limitations. Okay? The energies of everything are limited, but in the spiritual world, everything is unlimited. It means that the conservation of energy doesn't have to apply to the Lord. He's always above all the material rules. He can both produce unlimited energies and be the unchanged possessor of unlimited energy at the same time. But by our discussion today, what we have explained thus far, we can also maintain the law of conservation of energy, because we said that the byproduct of the living entity and the material nature, although having a different existence, at the same time are never separate from the Lord, right? They are resting on, they're still a part of His power, right? Just like the wind is resting on the sky. So we can say rather that we are an extension of Him. We are transformed indeed, right? We are a different product, that is certain, but we're still attached to the Lord, right? We're still attached to His power. We're still dependent on His power. That means that we can say that we're still part of that God energy mass that we had described last week. It means that we're keeping the unit of the Lord the same. So let's see how we can diagram that. So last week we had said that if we take the energy of the Lord to be total in this um, upper corner here, then for the Mayavadis, when the Lord produces byproducts, the material energy and the spiritual energy, he sort of like cleaves, he becomes less. But instead, if we understand that both energies still remain a part of the Lord, so connected to him, right? It means the Lord doesn't become any less. Right? We're all still together in this, we could say, mass of God energy. And so the law of conservation of energy is actually maintained in this way. So um, it's the way that we understand ourselves as parts and parcels of the Lord. We're still a part of him, we're still a part of his energy, but we're a small parcel of that energy. And that means that we can't ever be equal to him. So this is nicely explained by Sri Prabhu, right? The Lord doesn't break up into parts like what the Mayavadis think. And therefore, it means that he can't actually be changed in any way, no matter how many byproducts come from him. Okay, so now we can take another example to demonstrate our connection to the Lord. And now we will use the image of a light bulb in a circle. So we need the connection to the Lord to exist, being his energy. Right? Like a bulb needs power from the electric current. Light is a transformation of the electric energy. Light is dependent on the electricity, on the current, and it can't exist without the connection to the current. But at the same time, the light is not the current. So we can say that the light is an extension of the current, but they're simply not the same thing. It is the current that holds the power, not the light. And the current can do many things with itself that the light can't. For example, the current can be used as kinetic energy. The current is always the same. Its power is being transformed into many things. And all of those things are resting in the current's power. So the light, therefore, needs the current to exist, and the current is expressed by the light. So in the same way, we are connected to the Lord to exist, and he is expressed as God by presiding over us, right? This is how the infinite and the infinitesimal must exist at the same time, and why all of us being one with him makes no sense at all. Okay, so this doctrine, this doctrine of being an extension of the Lord's energy, this was explained by the Sri Sampradaya. Through this doctrine today, we have learned another way in which the Lord is unchanged. Although he is creating so many living entities in the material nature, living entities are existing as extensions of him. We're always connected to him, like the wind and the sky are connected, although being different. We're never actually separate from him. Say that we've taken our energy away from him to decrease him in some way. All the emanations, like the material nature and the living entities, we're actually connected to him, like in being, like in a continuum of being, basically, continuation of energy. So we can also reconcile the transformation of energy doctrine by saying that even though we are a part of him, we are so different from him. So this is very nicely summarized by Srila Prabhupada. We'll read a passage from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 13. Because everything is an emanation from him, the Mahavishnu, Mahasamashti, nothing of the cosmic energies is different from him, but all such expanded energies have specific functions and display as designed by the Lord, and therefore they are simultaneously different from the Lord. The living entities are also similar energy or marginal energy, marginal potency of the Lord, and thus they are simultaneously one with and different from him. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu perfectly synthesized all the doctrines, the different sampradayas into the wonderful Achintya Bheda Bhed Tattva, so that we can understand the relationship of the Lord and his energies in a very nice way. Right? But because the Mayavadis, they don't have any understanding of this, they have to come up with other ways to explain how the living entity and the material nature come about without change to the absolute truth. And we will read now about some analogies they misinterpret for this purpose. Unnecessarily fearing this, that means change to the absolute truth. One then concludes that this cosmic manifestation and the living entity are false. Shankaracharya gives the example of a rope being mistaken for a snake, and sometimes the example of mistaking an oyster shell for gold is cited, but surely such arguments are ways of cheating. And now we will look at Shankaracharya's misinterpretation of this analogy from the Upanishad. So Shankaracharya tries to explain away how the living entities see themselves as individuals now, right? We all see ourselves in individual bodies, and as well as the existence of the material nature, because remember, his doctrine teaches that the material nature is false. So the way he sees it then, or the way he explains it, is that we have mistaken the existence of this material world, and we've mistaken ourselves as individuals residing in this body. We've taken all of this to be reality, like one who sees a curled rope in the top picture and thinks it's a snake, or if they see a glittering oyster shell, we think that's gold, right? That's someone who's in illusion. And we agree that it is an illusion to see a rope as a snake or an oyster shell as gold. But when the illusion ends, then we can certainly see that the rope is a rope and the shell is the shell, right? Then the existence of the snake stops to us. Then the existence of the gold ends. But the rope is still there and the shell is still there. So what that means is that it's not that we think that when the snake is gone, the rope is also gone, and that when the gold is gone, the shell is also gone. The original foundation for the illusion still exists. Therefore, it means that when we start to understand that the material world is false, when we understand that we're not the body, we realize that the material world is still existing. It's just not our home. That's the truth. In the same way, we understand that we're not the body, but we're spirit soul, and we're eternally individuals. It's not that as soon as we have the understanding that we're not the body, our individuality goes away. Or as soon as we understand that the material world is not our home, the material world goes away. Both are still existing. We're still individuals, and the material world is still there. Right? So by trying to use these analogies in the wrong way, Shankaracharya's arguments are obviously cheating. As Prabhupada explains, he wants us to believe that once the illusion of the material world and the illusion of us being the body goes away, that we actually realize ourselves as one mass of God. He's actually misrepresenting the Lord's explanation of us being resting on Him or being connected to Him, as well as trying to make that the material world doesn't exist either. So it fits in with the theory that the material world was not created at all. As mentioned in the Mandukya Upanishad, the examples of mistaking a rope for a snake and an oyster shell for gold have their proper applications and can be understood as follows. The living entity in his original constitutional position is pure spirit. When a human being identifies himself with a material body, his misidentification is like mistaking a rope for a snake or an oyster shell for gold. The doctrine of illusory transformation of state is accepted when one thing is mistaken for another. Actually, the body is not the living entity, but according to the doctrine of illusory transformation of state, one accepts the body as the living entity. Every conditioned soul is undoubtedly contaminated by this doctrine of illusory transformation of state. So the illusion is there. We don't dispute this, right? These analogies of the rope and the oyster shell, they're given by the Upanishads. The Upanishads are speaking the truth, but the interpretation is the problem. Shankaracharya is using them to further the Mayavadi belief, right? And therefore we say that it's cheating others. The illusion is not that we've forgotten ourselves as God. that once we wake up from this illusion by Gyan, as the Mayavadis teach, the material world will just suddenly vanish and all of us will just become one homogeneous map of God. Basically, that's what the Mayavadis are trying to convince us of. Okay. We've discussed the obvious problems with this. We've discussed that it means that we, as God, apparently, have come under illusion. How does God come under illusion? Right? Why does God come under illusion? None of this has been explained by Mayavadis. They also can't explain how, when one is enlightened by Gyan, right, one doesn't actually suddenly start displaying the powers of God. One doesn't start displaying the powers of Krishna or Narayan. Neither do they explain that the material world still exists to those who are enlightened. There are many persons who have become enlightened in the past, even through the Mayavad philosophy, but they're still existing in a material world. The material world hasn't suddenly disappeared to them or to anyone else. Not sure if they probably want a certain number of people to become enlightened for the material world to disappear. It just doesn't make sense. Right? We understand what the Upanishads are saying. The illusion is that I think I am this body. I think that this material world is where I belong. And that is the doctrine of illusory transformation of state. The real transformation happened when we were changed from the energy of the Lord into living entities, into the material nature. Right? Then we were transformed into servants of the Lord. That is our correct position. The illusory transformation happens when we deny that we're servants of the Lord and we try to become masters of the Lord. Right? And that, of course, that condition of illusion, it must stop. We want that to stop. We want that to stop as much as those who are in the Mayavadi system wanted to stop. But the difference is that we wanted to stop so that we can become situated in our state of being the Lord's servants again. Not that we wanted to stop so that we can become God again. The conditioned state of the living entity is his diseased condition. Originally, the living entity and the original cause of this cosmic manifestation exist outside the state of transformation. But mistaken thoughts and arguments can overcome a person when he forgets the inconceivable energies of the Lord. Even in the material world, there are many examples of inconceivable energy. The sun has been producing unlimited energy from time immemorial, and so many byproducts result from the sun, yet there is no change in the heat and the temperature of the sun itself. If the sun, despite being a material product, can maintain its original temperature and yet produce so many byproducts, is it difficult to understand that the supreme absolute truth remains unchanged in spite of producing so many byproducts by his inconceivable energy? Thus, there is no question of transformation as far as the supreme absolute truth is concerned. So Srila Prabhupada is using a very nice example here. Because of the limitations of modern science, we may not understand how the energy of the sun is being distributed all over the universe. But the sun is actually the source of all fire. It's the source of the fire of digestion. It's also the source of electricity, actually. And so we see that the heat and the light of the sun are being transformed in so many ways across the universe, yet the sun is remaining the same. The power of the sun is not decreasing. So how then, as Prabhupada says, how then are we limiting God to say that whereas a material product of his can be capable of such a thing, we think that he's not capable of it. We think that he has to be changed in order to produce so many byproducts. This is effectively what Mayavadis are saying. In Vedic literatures, there is information of a material object called a touchstone, which simply by touch can transform iron into gold. The touchstone can produce an unlimited quantity of gold and yet remain unchanged. Right? So again, another material object that can do this can extend its power and yet remain unchanged. And we're saying that God can't do this. Right? Only in the state of ignorance can one accept the Mayavad conclusion that the cosmic manifestation and the living entities are false or illusory. No sane man would attempt to impose ignorance and illusion upon the absolute truth, who is absolute in everything, right? So in the same way that it's completely false to say that God could ever come under illusion, what kind of God would that actually be? How can we not actually be existing? How can our bodies not be existing? How can this material nature not be existing when it is real as anything for all of us? There is no possibility of change, ignorance, or illusion in him. The Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Absolute Truth is transcendental, completely different from all material conceptions and full of inconceivable potencies. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad confirms that the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead is full of inconceivable energies and that no one else possesses such energies. So by the great mercy of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, Acharya, Sri Prabhupada, and all the wonderful devotees across the world who are preaching this message, we are understanding the truth. We are avoiding these dangerous and offensive and foolish beliefs about the Lord, and we're understanding Him as He is, the absolute truth. So thank you all so much for your kind attention. I know there's a lot of concepts and analogies and things to digest. We will continue with the fourth chapter of fourth part of this chapter next week. And thank you so much. Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Gaura Hari ki jai. Are there any questions or comments, anything to clarify or that you'd like to comment on?
Hare Krishna, dear Mataji, Dandama Pranam for very beautiful class. One verse from Srimad Bhagavatam came now in my mind, 2934, about Lord when said to Brahma that everything which appears to be of any value and is without connection to him, this is his illusory energy. This I want to add. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thanks, Mercy. Hare Krishna. Are there any other comments or questions? I think that was quite a lot to take in. It's very important though that we understand these concepts because Mayavad philosophers are very good at explaining philosophy as they see it from the scripture. And so if we understand these concepts in the correct way, as what Caitanya Mahaprabhu is so mercifully explaining to us, we won't get misled by hearing any arguments. We may come across them inadvertently. For me, it's mostly in religious forums where persons are discussing these things, and I'm very happy to see a lot of very learned devotees countering points of the Mayavadis. It's very heartening to hear or read. Okay, so if there's no other comments or questions, then we will sing the second part of Gopinath, that beautiful bhajan by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. We sang the first part last week. And this is the second part. It's again very deep, very meaningful bhajan, and perfectly describes the illusions of the material world. Translation. O Gopinath, please remove the torments of worldly existence. I can no longer tolerate the pain of ignorance and the repeated succession of birth and death. O Gopinath, indeed, I am a servant of lust. Worldly desires are awakening in my heart, and thus the noose of furtive work is beginning to tighten. O Gopinath, when will I wake up and abandon afar this enemy of lust? And when will you manifest yourself in my heart? O Gopinath, I am your devotee, but having abandoned you and thus having forgotten my real treasure, I have worshipped this mundane world. O Gopinath, you know everything. Now having punished your servant, please give him a place at your lotus feet. O Gopinath, is this your judgment, that seeing me averse to you, you abandon your servant and don't bestow even a particle of mercy upon him? O Gopinath, I am certainly very foolish, and I have never known what is good for me. Therefore, such is my condition. O Gopinath, you are indeed the wisest person. Please look for a way to bring about auspiciousness for this fool, and please do not consider this servant as an outsider. Shri Radha Gopinath ki jai, Shri Santai Gaura Hari ki jai, Shri Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Santai Gaura Hari. Again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening, for your kind attention, and please join us next week when we will continue our discussions of chapter 20. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji.